Hello and welcome to the Trash Talk Podcast. I'm JJ, and today I have pimpkarp. How's it going?
Howdy. How's it going? Pretty good. How you doing?
Pretty good as well. So today we are going to talk about media. And by that I mean, books, movies, TV shows, video games, all of it. But of course, to make that possible, we're going to talk about it in a more abstract sense. We're going to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of different media, and then in the second topic, we're going to get around to what happens if you try to transplant a story from one medium into another, in what we call an adaptation. Is there anything in particular that you want to start with?
Not particularly. We could always go with the obvious of video games, because I feel like that's something that we're both pretty familiar with, and we can talk about the usual monstrosity that is video game to movie adaptations.
Adaptations later. Let's just go for strengths and weaknesses first, so that we can use that as our groundwork for the adaptations. But we can still talk about the strengths and weaknesses of video games, because those are, despite everything, they are in a way the most distinct of all of them. Because usually we're looking at books, we're looking at maybe comics, we're looking at TV shows and movies, and TV shows and movies are basically the same thing with a different runtime, kind of. There are other concerns. And, comics are just books with pictures. But video games are very different, that they're interactive. And that makes them unique. So, I guess, based on the comparisons we're doing, it's mostly relevant for story purposes. So, games that have absolutely no story, like, digital pinball game, which, they are real pinball games, or like Pong or something, wouldn't really be that relevant, I guess. But still, you have games like, for example, the Telltale games that are very story-driven, but you also have games that do have a very central story, but that do also still draw on their mechanics quite a bit. And I think the strengths and weaknesses lie very much in that interactivity. So, because if you take a video game and you take out the interactivity, you basically have a movie.
Yes. Which, there are some video games that kind of play out like movies. So, like, Metal Gear Solid series, for instance, especially some of the later ones, like Metal Gear Solid 4, I'm pretty sure the actual amount of cutscenes or cinematics in the game is like 60 to 70% of the game itself, and you have about like 30 to 40% of actual gameplay. So at that point, it's kind of like a movie that you play occasionally. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing necessarily, but you don't really have that kind of, there's no real comparison in other forms of media like that. Maybe something also like BioShock. I think this is one of the first things that comes to mind of something that you really can't portray BioShock in any other form of media to have it have the same kind of impact that you would that the game had. You know what I mean?
The point where I have to admit that I've only played very little BioShock.
Okay, so you want me to give you a little summary of why that is?
So,
it's a major spoiler. That's the only problem.
I just haven't gotten around to it, man. You can give spoilers. I think I've heard some spoilers on BioShock anyways, and the fact of the matter is I'll probably forget it by the time I get around to actually playing it.
That's fair.
But video games are very interesting. Did you want to bring up examples, or like of concrete what only books and video games?
Yeah, sure. If we're talking about BioShock still, the whole game, you're dropped into this kind of underground facility with no real idea of what's going on, just that it's kind of gone to hell. And your only real communication was with this one guy who is constantly telling you to do things. And he frames it in a way that's kind of like, okay, the specific phrase that he uses is, "Would you kindly?" I'm pretty sure. It's been a while since I've played it, but I could be slightly wrong. But he says this phrase over and over again when he's telling him, hey, go do this, go do that, go do this. So it seems like he's kind of giving you a choice, but in reality, he's kind of walking you towards killing off his main rival, and then afterwards it's revealed that he's been kind of like brainwashing you with that specific phrase to kind of make you do these things. And it's a mechanic that I think only can exist in a video game, because you're actually doing this stuff, and you feel like you have this freedom of choice throughout this whole game, maybe for like 10 or so hours up until then, and then you realize that this whole time you've been doing exactly what he wants you to do without realizing it. And the whole reveal is kind of what makes that game so much more unique than the other two.
Yeah, I guess those sort of things, anything that has to do with the player input kind of allows you to tell stories that you couldn't otherwise, right? You feel more immersed in a different way. Because if you could do the same thing, like you just explained in the movie, where you see, because you do effectively see movies oftentimes from the protagonist's perspective, even if they're not literally first person, but you do kind of see it from their point of view. You're with them a lot. But it kind of hits different if it turns out that your protagonist was manipulated versus your player character, who is effectively an extension of you, the player. So
yeah,
you almost feel like you were manipulated, but of course you were, right? You didn't have the context, you don't understand what's going on, but that kind of is hard to emulate in like a movie format, which I think is always the closest comparison to a video game. One obvious flaw, I guess you could say, that exists with video games as a genre is the idea that of pacing, right? So a lot of stories, as a matter of fact, I think all non-interactive stories pretty much have this idea of pacing, right? You can have a book that feels too drawn out and it becomes a chore to read. You can have movies where like scenes drag on too long and that becomes annoying. And sometimes that can be done intentionally to, make you unnerved or something, or to like really make you focus on a certain scene or something. But effectively, pacing is at best used very intentionally, and it's a lot harder to do in a video game. So it depends a little bit on what kind of a game you're talking about. If you have something like the Telltale games like The Walking Dead or something like that, there is only so much you can do between sort of cutscenes with quick time events and like dialogue trees. There is some walking around, but it's kind of hard to overdo that because those are usually relatively short segments, though I think in some of the games you can walk around a bit more. And then on the other hand, you have games like, for example, like the Fallout or Elder Scrolls games, where it's an open world game. There is a story going on, but you have side quests and you have and you can have huge maps that you can explore without even doing a quest at all. And then in some of the games, you have additional mechanics that you can play with, like in Fallout 4, you have base building stuff. And so there's really no way in those sort of the more open the game kind of gets, the more immersive it is in some way, but also the harder it is to really pace a narratively satisfying story.
No, I agree, and that's kind of the trade-off that you get with open world games, where open world you kind of have that freedom to kind of do whatever you want, but less linearity and less the developer has less control with what they want to convey with the story. Like obviously the main storyline is basically the same no matter what. Sometimes games have choices that can differentiate the path lines that you take, but at the end of the day, the story is going to be the same regardless. But if you have more constraints on what the player can do in a game, then you're going to be able to more control what the player actually sees, what the player actually does, how they go through the game, and that can be both a good and a bad thing depending on what they're trying to do. Like, I don't know, games like Skyrim, I don't think would be nearly as fun if you didn't have the freedom to just do whatever. Like the amount of times that I would just go into a village and just start attacking random people just to see how many guards I could get to come after me just for the heck of it. Or Grand Theft Auto, the same thing, just see how many cops I could get to come after me. You can't do that in other games, and that's kind of like the fun of video games, where you just have that freedom to just create chaos for the heck of it and then reload your save afterwards.
I mean, I guess what gets lost in terms of pacing is oftentimes the sense of urgency, and that can, to some degree, actually, ironically enough, take you out of the game, right? So video games, we said, are more immersive because you interact with them and you are the protagonist, you embody the protagonist in a way. But at the same time, if there's something that's presented as very pressing, but also it only progresses if you go to a certain place, then that can be kind of weird. Some games...
No, I absolutely love...
Sorry, go ahead.
Go on, sorry.
So some games do some decent job about it, but where if like certain events are going on, maybe some areas are locked or some NPCs aren't there, so that it does still, even if it isn't as pressing because it's still not necessarily time sensitive, it at the very least feels like the event is in fact affecting the world. But still, it's very hard to sort of convey that unless you actually put a timer on it, at which point it becomes less satisfying gameplay-wise oftentimes.
Yeah, I was going to say how it's really funny in those types of games where they don't have a constraint on you actually going to this time-sensitive thing, and all the NPCs are talking about how, like, oh my gosh, this terrible catastrophe is happening right now, and meanwhile you're off doing like a fetch quest for somebody on the other side of the map. You know, it's like the sense of urgency isn't presented the same way, so you're kind of just left feeling like, huh, all right, the world's about to end, but I really got to return this basket of flowers to this person. Yeah. So it's it does make it kind of humorous, though.
I love that example. I mean, yeah, so it does. If you go for a serious tone, that does kind of break with that, and I mean that is, at the end of the day, I think that's just something that you have to accept. But there are certainly constraints that you have to consider there, and I think it's good that we started on video games because they are certainly the most extreme case of where between interaction and pacing, and I'm sure there are other things that we haven't even mentioned yet. There are, I mean, even mechanics and how they kind of represent, in a way, the world are kind of all things that are, it's a subcategory, I guess, of the interaction, really affect what stories you can effectively tell, right? So if you have a story that like really relies on its pacing for narrative tension, for example, then maybe you should tell it in a video game, right? Maybe you should make it a movie.
I agree. Yeah. But I mean, do we want to keep talking with video games, or do we want to switch to different media? I'm fine with.
I feel like I just kind of mentally was wrapping it up, so I guess it would be time to move on to the next thing.
Which I was going to say maybe books would be a good one to move on to from here.
Books
I don't know if you're a big reader. I used to be.
Are on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Not only are they not interactive, but they also don't have visuals, they don't have audio, and they do have a lot of text, which, I mean, video games sometimes have text, but it does almost feel like if there is a spectrum, it's kind of like, you know, books, and then comics, and then movies/TV shows are kind of similar, they're just mostly different lengths, and then video games on the other end. Books have certain things. I mean, pacing is actually an interesting question there as well, because it's almost impossible to influence how fast someone reads something. I do sometimes notice myself reading things that seem to be happening at a quick pace a little bit quicker. When it feels like a character is hurrying and you feel like you're hurrying through reading it, because that kind of the tension can spill over, but it doesn't have to. And so there is that to some degree where it has that in common with video games, but I think a lot of it is also just the lack of visuals both limits you on what you can do, because you have to kind of rely on the reader's imagination. So that means you have to describe a lot more, at least where it's relevant. I mean, you can sometimes have people's imagination fill in the blanks, but if a character all of a sudden starts speaking and you never actually establish that they're in the room, and it's kind of really important that they are part of the conversation, but they haven't said anything up to that point, it seems a bit jarring, right? So you kind of want to, like, if they're like hidden in a corner or something and they were just listening in, they were eavesdropping, then sure, right? But you, the reader, should know who's in what scene if they are relevant to that scene, for example. And I think the counterpoint to that actually is that you can sometimes use it effectively to hide a little bit what's going on, right? I was reading a book recently where there's a twist at the end that two characters are actually the same character, right? And it doesn't really, I mean, and I'm not talking about Fight Club or something like that, right? It's
okay.
It's just, there was a character that was kind of only talked about as sort of mostly just as a nebulous force, and then they were only really in the scene with one other character, in scenes with one other character, and then another character who was in a lot of the scenes with the protagonist and was helping them along. And at the end, it's kind of put together that that's actually the same character, which you would have obviously been able to tell, because it's not like he was using a clever disguise, it's just that the main character didn't know what that other character looked like. And simultaneously, that basically no one that interacted with one of the characters would have had a reason to know the other one. And so, at least not know what they look like. And so, that reveal kind of works. But you could never do that in a movie, right? You'd be like, hey, why is that actor playing both characters? Right? At best, and at worst, it's just, that's the same person. What's going on here? So, there are strengths to the fact that you can't see what's going on, and maybe you can cheat people a little bit that way.
Yeah, I agree. I will say though that there's some very interesting things that I've read with pacing, or things that I've seen in books that they do really, really cool things with the pacing of it. So like you said earlier, there's no real way to control how quickly somebody reads a book, how quickly somebody can go through a book. Some people are just naturally quicker readers, that kind of thing. But certain books are able to kind of instill this sense of dread and uneasiness with how they start phrasing things or how they start writing things, with slowing some of the stuff down so you kind of know what's coming next, but you also kind of don't, and you just want to keep reading faster as a result. But more specifically, there's a book called House of Leaves, which I'm guessing you might not be familiar with. It's not a super popular book. I think I actually have it on my shelf if I can find it at some point. It is one of the weirdest design books I've ever seen. Specifically, like, certain pages will have only one sentence on the top and completely blank page for the rest of it. Certain pages will have like a spiral on the page of the words, and it's done so because it's like a story framed within a story of a guy discovering this house that's kind of bigger on the inside than it seems, and it's a very, very, I know it doesn't sound interesting, but the way that it's phrased, it's a very unsettling horror story of you kind of experiencing this kind of claustrophobia through how the book is actually constructed. And it's something that, again, could only be done in a book form because of the way that it's done. And it's one of the most unique forms of any media I've ever seen in my life, honestly. Yeah, it's a really, really cool book.
I was just thinking, like, if you wanted to, like, really make sure that, like, something hits, I mean, there are some things you can do. First of all, if you want to have something where, like, every word is emphasized, okay, I didn't actually emphasize this, but you get the idea, right? Then you can do something like having periods between every word. Or if you wanted to, like, really stretch it, you could have, like, one word per page. But then, of course, then also is the concern of, like, you do really want to print a page that only has like one or two words on it, which you can do, but you should probably do sparingly, because I feel like if I like buy a 500-page novel and it turns out that, you know, like half of the pages are just like gimmicky and relatively short, then I might feel cheated. I mean, obviously, it's always the question of like how well is it done, and like again, but I was just saying, like, you have to, like, if you do something like that, you do have to be sure that like it is also achieving the intended effect, which is probably why it's not done that much.
No, I like I said, I think it's like the only book I've ever seen that does something quite like this, and I don't know if it's in here. I just keep looking.
Kind of related to that is a medium that I also mentioned earlier, which is comic books.
Yes.
Which can do a lot more of that sort of stuff with how it does its panel layout, right? So you'll have pages that are just relatively regular grids. You sometimes have more dynamic layouts. Sometimes you have like just a handful of panels on a page. Sometimes you have a lot of them. And that can oftentimes convey a lot of stuff that you couldn't really do in a book, or not as easily in a book. And at the same time, obviously you have that visual component now that you don't otherwise have. You can still do the thing where like you don't know which character is speaking, but just having them slightly off panel and you just have the speech bubble coming in from the off. But generally speaking, you can do a lot of stuff there with pacing as well. Like sometimes if you want to show that something is that something feels very slow, or that is like that is like a moment of pause, you can just repeat a panel. You know, it's lazy, it's cheap. And if you just have the same panel back to back with like no additional text in it, so like maybe panel 1 is a speech bubble, but then panel 2 and maybe the third one, same image but no speech bubbles, it's like, okay, there's very clearly pause here. And you could do other stuff. I think it was Watchmen that was entirely done in 9x9 3x3, like a 9-panel grid pages, which is supposed to like invoke a certain idea. I don't remember exactly what the explanation for that was, and I haven't actually read Watchmen. I've only seen the movie, which is a whole other kind of worms. But so that is one that I've heard mentioned oftentimes for like how you can really use the structure of the comic effectively. And one that comes to mind that I have read is the Old Man Logan story from... so that is what the movie Logan is also based on, the Wolverine movie. Though, I say based on, it's like more like inspired by. The stories don't actually have that much in common. But there is this thing in the entire story, or like in the first part of the story, Wolverine's retired, right? He hasn't used his claws in forever. And then, like, thing after thing happens to him, and eventually he snaps. And there's literally a double page splash where it just says snicked, which is the onomatopoeia that is used when his claws come out, right? So it's just like a double page with just one word, like very large on it. But in the context of that story, because that is such a big moment, right? Because it's always been like he doesn't use his claws anymore, right? He doesn't fight anymore. He has a family, he's settled down, and then that kind of showcases how important the moment is, right? Normally, if you have a regular Wolverine comic or an X-Men comic, it's just like, oh yeah, like that happens like every other panel, right? Like his claws come out, it's like a little snake down next to them, like no one cares. But in that story, it was kind of important to the story, and so it highlights that by having this, again, like 2 pages dedicated to just one onomatopoeia. It's like, what? But like if you read it, it makes sense. Like, so that book generally had pretty good art, but that's besides the point.
It's funny that you bring up Watchmen, though, too, because of the fact that I don't read that many comics, but that is actually one of the only ones that I have read. I read it back in high school, so I don't really remember a lot of it, but I remember it being one of the more unique things that I've ever read, just because of how it presents itself, how it portrays the characters, and just the overall feel of it is just something like I've never really experienced before. And I used to read a lot. Like up until I went to college, I read all the time, and still to this day, it's one of the few that like really sticks out for kind of how unique it was and how it really presented just these different characters and how it kind of takes the superhero archetype or dynamic and makes it like all these characters are kind of just pieces of garbage at the end of the day. Maybe like 1 or 2 were good, but most of them were really, really crappy people. So
I mean,
I can't remember any that were like great.
I feel like the best you can say is for some of them that they're trying, right? Like you have like Night Owl and Silk Spectre. I think those are comparatively more favorable characters, but I mean, Rorschach is just insane, and Dr. Manhattan is
chaotic,
not even really human anymore. The Comedian is kind of, I don't know, even like he's just very brutal, and I guess he's a bit narcissistic in a way where like he doesn't really care about other people's feelings. I think like he just kills people and doesn't give a crap. Like he's, I guess, psychopathic, you could almost say. And
a little bit.
In a lot of ways, that makes sense, right? They used them in the Vietnam War, I think, is where they were originally used. Mm-hmm. Well, not originally. I think there were heroes before then, but like that is where the Watchmen characters all come from before superheroes were outlawed. And so, in that scenario, someone like the Comedian is very, very useful. But then, if you have like a regular civilized society, then maybe he's a lot less useful. And not to mention that he committed various war crimes in Vietnam as well, so that's... But then again, the US also committed a lot of war crimes in Vietnam in the real world, so it's not like that is entirely out of character for the US Army. Anyways.
US committing war crimes? I never.
Yeah. It's not like those have happened a lot.
Oh, Lord.
So... so comics can do a lot of things. And I think in a lot of ways, that is an extension of books, because I feel like comics can almost everything that books can. I mean, obviously, if you have something that needs a lot of text, then comics might not be the optimal way of doing that, but I have also seen comics make use of both semblance of extensive narration. Also, Jonathan Hickman's X-Men books from more recently do that a lot, where they'll just have pages in between that are mostly or entirely text. And you can do that. I wouldn't overdo it, because if someone is buying a comic book, then they don't want to basically be sold a novel in disguise, but, well, 22 pages, you probably can't write a novel, even if they're, like, letter pages or whatever. But, so, comics can do a lot that books can, so I think they have a lot of the same strengths, and some of the weaknesses, but not nearly as many, because most of the weaknesses come from the visual aspect. So I almost find that comics, in some ways... I mean, obviously the pacing issue still to a degree, but comics are almost, in a way, an improvement on books. I mean, I like books. I don't actually think that comics are always better than books, but in terms of what you can and can't do with the story, I think they are oftentimes an improvement. Though, of course, comics that suffer from other things, like a lot of comics being serialized makes them kind of two books or I guess it makes comics to graphic novels technically what TV shows are to movies.
Yeah.
And also, again, I mentioned most comic books are 22 pages, I think, which is relatively short, which is another constraint. So there are certainly things about comics that probably work better in books, and also books is a very broad term. I've mostly been thinking about novels, sort of your typical 200 to 500 page novels, but there are, of course, other forms of books as well. And yeah, I think that's my take on written media.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I don't read too much anymore. I've been trying to get back into it, so I don't really have too much else to add myself.
So the tip there is to just actually take time off of your electronic devices, and then the reading comes naturally.
That's true, but then how am I going to play my video games?
Well, yeah, but you can't read and play video games at the same time. No, it's generally a thing, right? So, over the last while, my family has a weekend home, sort of, and so, like, lately I've been going with my parents there again, like, sometimes, some weekends, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm just not taking a computer, and like, you won't believe how much I can read in a weekend if I don't have a computer with me.
I can imagine.
So, that's basically how I've been reading, like, way more, like, this year than I have probably the last 10 years or something. So...
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about, I guess, the one big remaining thing would be, like, movies and TV shows. I guess that those do warrant talking about. Almost Strengths and Weaknesses, we kind of... It's almost like we compared them to movies in some way, at least the video games very naturally, and then the books with the limitations. I guess movies' main limitation always is the runtime, right? That comes up.
Yeah.
Adaptations we're going to talk about later, but comes up a lot there, where it's like a lot of stories that you have in other media don't really fit in a movie. I mean, even Watchmen, right? That's based on a graphic novel, I think it was originally released as single issues, but I think it's a relatively short story as far as comics are concerned. And still, they like cut the complete Black Freighter stuff, and
it's a pretty long book, actually. I think it's a couple hundred pages. The full Watchmen.
I mean, again, to be fair, a single comic is just 22 pages. So if you have like 5 issues, you're already over 100 pages. But yeah, I mean, in a way, right? So if you've ever seen like a full Avengers run or something, you would probably not say that it's a big story, because those sometimes are released in like hardcover omnibuses, and like those things can get like really thick. That is not the correct orientation. But sometimes, I mean, there have been comic books that have run for like hundreds of issues, and again, 20 pages each. I think DC has, for the longest time, not renumbered Action Comics and Detective Comics. I think they have done it a couple of years back, but for a while they haven't, and they've gotten like over 500 issues or something. So like the entire run would be like over 1,000 pages, but well, over 10,000 pages rather. But
yeah,
of course, I mean, obviously, there's also, it's not really like one continuous story in a way, but it is often have the same characters. It's a whole thing, but so yeah, comics can run for a while, which is also what TV shows can do. Hey, I'm back on track. TV shows have kind of almost the opposite problem of movies, where sometimes they're too long, and I think we're kind of starting to get away from that. So we have started seeing a lot of shows that have shorter seasons, right? It used to be that it was like 24 episodes, and that slowly shrank down to 22, basically, to 21, 22, over like decades, right? I've recently looked at, I think X-Files had 24, 25 episodes per season, and that was in the 90s. And then shows from the 2010s oftentimes still had like 22 episodes. I think around the time 13 also became very popular, but nowadays we've seen a lot of 10, 8, sometimes 6. I think I've seen some 4-part limited series, which is like, this is barely a TV show at that point.
Yeah.
But
that's a miniseries.
I mean, yeah. And I think that is, in a lot of ways, kind of a newfound strength almost, where it's like, if you have a story to tell, and you want to tell it in a sort of a cinematic, I guess, way, like in an audiovisual format, TV miniseries, right? Like, just make it however long it needs to be. Now, that does run some other strengths and weaknesses, where traditionally you want your TV episodes to stand on their own, right? They can be part of a larger narrative, and they oftentimes are, but you want every episode to have a beginning, middle, and end. So if you miss an episode, it's not that tragic. And also, if you just catch a random episode, even if you don't know what the overarching plot is, oftentimes you'll get something out of it. And even if not, right, you're waiting a week at least between episodes. Because remember, we're talking about TV here. So it makes sense that you would want something that kind of fulfills the basic story structure in its own right. That has also been slowly starting to disappear with a lot of the very shorter limited series, like a lot of the Disney Plus stuff for Marvel and Star Wars, almost feeling more like full narratives in some cases, where Hawkeye and Falcon and the Winter Soldier don't really have natural breaking points in their episodes. It's just kind of an episode ends and then the next episode eventually starts. And those were released weeks apart still, like 1 week apart between each episode. So that is always one of those things that is a bit complicated to judge, because that could be a good thing or a bad thing, but that's not really what we're talking about right now. But if you have shows, if you do, I guess the best stories to do for TV are those that do kind of have that. We can have like an overarching season-long narrative, but also have individual story episodes, right? Speaking of the Marvel shows, right? WandaVision did a great job with that, where their sort of framing device was this sitcom thing, and they had every episode, for like the first 5 episodes or so, was like based on sitcoms of a different decade. Well, they say it was just generally based on the decade, but in practice it seems like they usually copied it off of one show. But so you had the first couple episodes where, even though there was overarching elements, they made very good use of that sort of episodic format of a TV show. So I think I hit on some strengths and weaknesses of TV shows, which is mostly length. I mean, I guess, again, compared to books, you have more visuals, but like, kind of already said that by books not having visuals. So
yeah. I think my big thing with TV shows is that they run into an issue where if it's a show that's not popular enough, it can get rushed towards the end. Or if it is popular enough, they don't change enough to kind of make it seem more unique, and then you just have season after season of the same exact thing. So, for instance, 2 shows that instantly come to mind for that would be Walking Dead and Boardwalk Empire. I don't know if you've watched either of them.
I have watched the first couple seasons of The Walking Dead, but honestly, I just stopped eventually because it just wasn't that interesting anymore. I don't know. I mean, it is very samey, you're right. And that one is based on a comic book as well, so...
It is, yes.
And
so for me personally...
I don't think they ever quite... I don't know if by now, but like as far as I've heard, like one of the last things that I've heard was them doing The Whisperers, which I know were in the comics. I think I've read like the first issue at one point, but I haven't really read the Walking Dead comics, but so it does seem like they were at least for a long while very actively pulling from the comics. And still, it felt like... I mean, I guess the comics might have been pretty repetitive, although I know for a fact that Robert Kirkman, I think is the writer, can write good comics, because Invincible was fucking amazing. The show is also pretty good.
Yeah.
So that's beside that. But yeah,
let's check it out.
You were making a point.
Oh, no, you're good. So yeah, with Walking Dead, I actually got back into it because I started dating my last ex, and she was really into it, and they had the new season starting where they had that the thing with Glenn, if you're familiar with that whole plot line, where that was like a huge thing.
I know the character, but I don't know what plot line exactly you're talking about.
Basically, the again, spoiler warning,
I mean, yeah.
But it doesn't matter at this point. There's a very famous scene in the comics where he gets killed, and they were trying to see if that would deviate from the show or not, or if he would actually die in the specific season premiere episode. I got back into the show because of her, and I stopped watching after the second season because the second season, the first season was great. 6 episodes, 7 episodes, whatever it was. Fantastic, short, sweet, to the point. Second season, the first half was terrible. So boring, nothing worthwhile happening. Second half got better, third season good, fourth season decent, but again, it starts to drag on to a point where the same thing happens every season, where they're in trouble, they need to get away from the zombies, they find some place to go that's relatively safe, and then something happens where they need to escape the place they are because they make enemies, and it just goes on and on and on, where it's the same recycled plotline over and over again, where just... I get it. You're only limited so much with what you can do with this kind of show, but at the same time, it's like, okay, I feel like if you're going to actually have 7, 8 seasons, however much it had by the end, like, at least try to have a season where it's not the exact same kind of scenario over and over again.
Well, first of all, what it had by the end, I'm pretty sure the show is still going, and second of all, I think it's like 14 or something by now. I don't know.
Jesus.
I'm gonna look this up because The Walking Dead. Also, there's like at least 2 spin-offs by now. As a side note.
Yes, I think there might even be a third. I remember reading recently.
Oh, no, actually, it's ending this year or ended this year. Let's see. It is ending this year. So it is still going, and it's season 11. So I did overestimate it a little bit, but season 11 is the last one. It has 24 episodes, and well, the next one is airing. Airing October 2nd, and the other ones are not announced yet. But
goodness,
there's that.
But yeah, the other problem I think I have with TV shows is that if they're not popular enough, they get canceled before they meet their logical conclusion, which ties into Boardwalk Empire, which is a show that I just recently watched for the first time. I actually just finished it maybe 2 weeks ago at most. I really liked it. I kind of watched it at work a lot, so I didn't always pay the most attention. But I really, really liked the pacing of the show. I liked the setting of it. Obviously, me growing up in southern New Jersey near Atlantic City, it kind of hit more close to home because I live very close to Atlantic City, so that kind of had more relevance to me because I'm like, oh, this location exists. Oh, this person was actually real, and it was actually fairly accurate to some of the stuff that these people did in real life. But the problem is the final season is so rushed and so all over the place with how they try to close everything off before they end it because of the fact that they're like, all right, the show isn't making enough money, we're ending it now. And you could just feel that with how rushed everything is, how disjointed everything feels. And that's the problem that TV runs into with movies. It has a set ending. You know, obviously they might have to cut little things here and there depending on budget, but for the most part, movies have a logical conclusion, a logical frame of what they want to do. But TV shows, if they start to run into issues further along in production, they can't account for that when the show starts. So you have that issue where it starts to run into, okay, this is very clearly rushed. Again, another example, Game of Thrones started off very good. By the end, I don't want to watch the show ever again because of how bad it ends. Like, maybe the first 4 seasons I'll watch, but
I haven't seen Game of Thrones, but from my understanding is that the main problem is that the showrunners didn't have any source material to work off of, and they clearly didn't really have a good idea of where they want the show to go, I guess. I've also heard a theory that apparently a lot of plot arcs had like natural trajectories, and people thereby guessed where the plot was going, and apparently there might have been some intentional subversion of expectations there, which is always a thing. Like, sometimes showrunners think that, oh, the audience guessed what was going to happen, so thereby I need to change it because I need to surprise the audience, which, no you don't, right?
Yeah, they try to get cute with it.
If the story is good, it's going to be interesting even if I can see where it's going. Also,
yes,
you can still have surprising elements in an overall predictable story if you really want to. So yeah, it's my understanding that it's kind of mostly the showrunner's fault that Game of Thrones ended poorly. I don't even think it was because it was rushed necessarily. Because
no, they actually had a budget enough to go for another couple seasons. Yeah. I remember reading about that when it happened, but they got Disney money to go make Star Wars, and then Disney pulled their rights to make Star Wars movies because of how badly it ended. So they didn't get the Star Wars rights anymore. Sucks to suck, I guess, but you know.
But yeah, so the rushed ending is almost kind of the better possibility to what can also happen, which is just the show gets cancelled in the middle of a plotline.
Yes.
Love it when that happens. Sometimes, if there's enough fan interest, you'll get like a wrap-up movie or something. But not even that always happens. And
are you familiar with a show called Scrubs by any chance?
I am familiar with it. I've only seen the occasional episode, though I'm not a super fan
entirely related. But there's a 9th season of that show that every fan of it tends to forget exists because it has 8 seasons that are pretty solid. It's not the greatest show, but it's a solid 8 seasons. And then it ends on a very logical conclusion where he leaves to go, move on to a different location as a doctor. Then they start the 9th season with a different main character where they have some of the same characters come back, but it's a hospital school instead of actually in a hospital setting.
I think I've heard
and it just feels
so
shoehorned. That's another issue that comes into shows where it's like, okay, we're going to do a slight spin-off, but it's going to be the same show. And it's very obviously just like, all right, we're just trying to get a little extra cash grab that pulls on people's nostalgia. And it's rough.
It's like, I've seen plenty of good spin-offs. The problem is just, you have to have an idea that is worth spinning off. right? Because otherwise it either ends up being just like this thing, but again, or it ends up just being completely directionless, right? Like sometimes they have like, oh, this character is popular in that show, so let's give them their own show. And it's like, yes, this character was popular because of their dynamic with the other characters. If you take them out of that dynamic, they're a lot less interesting. And if you don't have a story for them, it's even less interesting.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that can happen. And again, there are plenty of good spin-offs out there. It's not that that's inherently a bad idea. It's just, you don't do a spin-off because it makes money. You do a spin-off because you have a story idea. I mean, obviously you do everything because it makes money, because that's how the industry works, but...
naturally. Like Game of...
in a perfect...
Yeah. I mean, I know Game of Thrones is doing at least 1 or 2 spin-offs coming up. I know they're doing like a prequel, and then I know they're doing a spin-off where they focus on Jon after the ending of the show, apparently. That's the new one that they announced.
I know
I think they announced it a few weeks ago.
They're doing the House of the Dragon prequel with Matt Smith as, I think, one of the main characters, who, of course, famously played the Doctor. Hey, speaking of shows that has good spin-offs, Torchwood, I still like. I know some people might not like it as much, and I've heard good things about Sarah Jane Adventures, which I have not yet watched. Which I also should, but that's besides the point. Also, speaking of a show that can run forever and still usually be good, you know? I mean, the recent showrunner wasn't that great, but Doctor Who ran for, I think, 24 seasons initially, from like 63 to 89, and then it has run for 13 seasons now from 2005 until now. And it's still going, well, you know. Like, the first 10 seasons were actually pretty good. And the most recent 3 were not as good, though I think Flux was fine, but the showrunner, like the best showrunner they've ever had, is coming back, and the show is probably getting good again. But
let's check it out again. I haven't watched that in a while.
Hey, I really like Doctor Who. And again, this is one of those shows that kind of works because it's kind of episodic in nature, right? So you have those individual episodes that kind of work on their own. And because of, like, traveling all throughout time and space and alien planets and all that stuff, you can never really run out of new ideas, right? And even if you do something that's, like, not completely original, it can still be good, because you still like the characters, but it's just, there's so many stories that they can tell with that it has run for, like, I mean, not entirely continuously, but it has run for now almost 70 years, like 60 years, right? 63 to 23 will be 60 years.
Yeah.
I can do math, I swear. 60th anniversary special coming up, well, next year. And yeah, still has told a lot of good stories in that time. I think it's probably, unless you have something specific to say about TV shows, it's time to go to the facts of the week.
All right.
What is your fact of the week as the guest?
My fact of the week is that cats only meow around humans because they instinctively learned over time that humans respond to that kind of pitch. So apparently cats in the wild, when they're not around humans, never meow. It's only in they realize that humans react to that kind of pitch, that tone. I guess similar to a baby's cry, where humans kind of reacted to that, and they started taking care of them more when they started meowing more. So cats kind of just trained us by meowing at us all the time. And I can speak as a fact to that because my cat meows at me constantly for food, and I tend to give it to him more often than not to get him to stop whining.
I think I've heard that they also meow to kittens sometimes, but I'm not 100% sure about how that dynamic evolved. If that also is like just a side product of them having adapted to humans. Yeah, that's one of those very interesting ones. I mean, there's generally a lot of interesting stuff about how animals adapted to live with humans, like mostly cats and dogs.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, like, they don't need to communicate in that sort of a pitch if they just want to talk with each other. Well, talk, I say.
Yeah.
Communicate with each other. They're not exactly writing poetry out there. They're maybe saying, like, hey, look at this. And that's about as complicated as that gets. But yeah, no, they're very good at that. My fact of the week is... Well, let me ask you a question. I love the fact that you can do it as a question. What makes a country a country?
I genuinely don't know. I'm assuming paperwork.
So there is no like official clear definition for that, so that's not necessarily an easy question. But if say you had your own currency, a population, and international relations with other countries, you might say that that is a country, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I present to you the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, also officially the Sovereign Military Hospitaller Order of St. John of Jerusalem, of Rhodes, and of Malta, because of course they go back to the Knights Templar, and they are a sovereign order that has 3 citizens. They have a currency. They do have... So the order itself has more members than just 3, but it's only 3 that are granted citizenship, the top 3. They have international relations. They have a flag, they have a coat of arms, they have an anthem. But they don't have any territory. So, like...
Yeah.
Huh? I think they have observer status at the UN, and so they used to control the island of Malta, I think, which is part of why they're kind of still treated like a country in some ways. But they are, by like most metrics, by a lot of metrics that you could use at least, a country. But they don't have territory. I mean, they have some embassies and stuff, which, legally speaking, the embassy still belongs to the country that it resides on, but a lot of the local authorities don't have power over the embassy. It's a whole thing. But they do have some buildings that they control, but they don't really have any territory in that sense. And, yeah. Though it possesses no territory, the order is often considered a sovereign entity of international law as it maintains diplomatic relationships with many countries. That's a direct quote from Wikipedia. And they are an order of Templars that had some territory for a while, and now they don't, and they still kind of exist. Not too dissimilar to the Vatican, except that the Vatican still has, like, that little plot of land, which is, like, a block in the middle of Rome. Like, the Vatican is tiny.
Yeah.
I think I've used it as a fact before that the Forbidden City in Beijing is like it's like a palace of the former Chinese royalty, right? It's literally bigger than the Vatican, but it's just a palace. It's bigger than this country, so yeah. But this country here is even smaller because it's not officially a UN member, but it still has observer status, and
yeah.
So they're not necessarily in any way, shape, or form less of a country than the Vatican, except they don't have territory. Let me actually quickly look up the Vatican City. Is half a square kilometer, or 0.2 square miles, well, 0.19 to be precise. In size, I want to look up really quickly, speaking of palaces, does it say perchance? Fucking hell, hectares. Let's see. HA in AM squared, please. Thank you. I know it's like a power of 10, but I don't know which one. Okay, so that is... Wait, why am I doing that? I wasn't meaning to do that. Suffice it to say...
I was going to practice my German.
Oh, that is German. I don't sometimes notice in which language I read, so it's a factor of 1 to a... Wait, so if I do 1,070 hectares, that would be, what, 10.7 square kilometers? Yeah. So that means that Versailles, the famous French palace, is like freaking, 20 times the size of the Vatican. Just as a point.
So I actually used to travel a little bit when I was younger. My grandma used to get really good flight deals because my grandpa used to work at an airline nearby. I've actually been to Versailles. That place is fucking insanely big. Just massive castle.
So I have not been And I don't even need a flight. I can just take a train. Well, it will probably take like 3 or 4 hours, but like,
yeah,
like I can take a train and be there the same day. I'm pretty sure.
Which is wild to me.
Europe is tiny, my dude.
Yeah.
Like
America's massive. Like I've driven halfway across the country before with a few friends to Colorado, and without really stopping overnight on the way, we just kind of drove through and stopped at a couple places. It's about 30 to 35 hours one way to get a little over halfway across our country. It's very, very large.
Let me look up a thing that I like to bring up at times as well. Speaking of sizes, 357 square kilometers, 137,000 square miles. That is Germany. Total area, and then U.S. states. Let's see, land area in... Do we have square kilometers? Thank you. What did I say? It was 357. Land area... Wait, is this land area? But it says total area. It's percentage water. I guess we're doing total area. Total area, 357. So, Germany is between the sizes of Montana and New Mexico. Which, if Germany was a US state, it would be the 5th largest, which is not that little, but does it also list population here by chance? It does not, of course, because why would it? Let's see, US states by...
I mean, I live in a small state, but it's, I think, the most densely populated state, so...
Because I think we have, like... that is... Yeah, we have about twice the population of California, which is the most populous state in the United States. So,
is it really?
So
I guess that makes
there
sense.
are 4 US states that are larger than Germany, and there is not a single US state that has even half the population of Germany. Because actually, so this 2021, yeah, California had 39 million, and Germany has 84 million right now. So,
jeez.
So what I always say is that the US has roughly 4 times the population of Germany, 4 times. And again, you have 4 states that are bigger.
To be fair, Montana has a lot of nothing. Same with like Nebraska, Kansas, Idaho. There's a lot of states that are just kind of like, all right, we're just driving through here.
Yes, because the US is huge and doesn't have that many people for comparative to its size, while Europe is smaller than the entire US. Like, well, Europe as a continent probably isn't quite, but like the European Union, I think, is smaller than the US or something by total land area. I don't know that for a fact, though. And has, like, multiple times the population, probably, because, I mean, France is almost the population as Germany. So the EU probably has a comparable population at the very least. European Union. Do we have total population numbers? And I mean, we're totally off topic at this point, but... area is 4 million square kilometers. Do we have a population? We do. So yeah, population is actually not that much larger than the US, but so the EU has a population of 447 million. Oh, sorry, billion people, of course. Million, not be. Wait, no, million. It's
million.
8 billion in the world. It's 447 million. I'm sorry to trip over my own stuff. So okay, 447 million. The US has 320 million, somewhere in 320s. I don't know exactly, but so that's about 1.5 times. No, well, not quite. It's like, I don't know, 1.3 times the population or something. Wait, that sounds about right.
Sounds about right. And then India has like a population of over 1 billion people. India alone.
Yes, and China has like slightly more.
Yeah.
United States of America has a population we know has an area of 3 million. So actually, the overall population density of Europe is not even that much higher than of the EU is not that much higher than of the US. So it's I guess it's not that crazy. But to be fair, there's also like the Scandinavian countries which are like mostly populated in the south, I think. And then, like, Spain is not that densely populated because there's, like, a lot of very inhospitable areas. So, yeah, I guess overall it's not even that different. Still, like, again, the fact that the European Union has a comparable size, is, like, in the same order of magnitude as the US, still kind of tells you that, like, for me going to France is, like, for you, well, I mean, technically, for you to go to New York, right? Because we have a border. So, yeah, land border.
New York's rough. I'm not a big city person though, so I don't like that intensely populated, massive humdrum.
There is upstate. I was talking about the state of New York, of course, as compared to the state of New Jersey, as I was comparing France to Germany, which, I mean, maybe size-wise, those are relatively smaller states, but, like, still, right? Like, going from, like, California to Nevada is like going from Germany to France, right? Like, going from LA to Vegas is probably not that different than going from, like, I don't know, maybe even, like, from Munich to Paris or something, because I think Vegas and LA are actually pretty close. And so if I go, like, Berlin, Paris is probably a lot further, actually. Besides the point. Very besides the point, we are, however, going to guess some music. So I've shown this website before, when we talked about Hurdle, when it was shown to me by Smokey on a previous episode. This is Hurdle Decades, which is like Hurdle, but for decades. The idea is we guess music. So
I like how they have George Michael Hurdle.
Yeah, so this has some specific artists, but I don't like specific artist ones, even for artists that I do like, because it's usually, like, even the artists that I like, I know maybe like 20 songs off, and these go very obscure, but the decade ones are usually a lot more doable, so I was thinking about doing these four, and, you know, I'm going to let you decide. Are we going to go ascending or descending?
60s. Let's go ascending.
Ascending. So we're going to start with these 60s.
Which I'm least familiar with.
So, the way this works, right, we have this snippet here, we can listen to it, we can make a guess if we want to. If we don't have a guess, we can skip instead. It'll give us an extra second, next time it gives us extra 2 seconds, then 3, then 4, then 5. If we say we don't know it, then we're done. Very simple.
Okay.
Let's play this. And let's hopefully not get copyright claims, especially in the 60s, those are particularly spicy, I think. Let me play that again.
No idea, but it actually does sound a little familiar.
I was just thinking that, right? It's like, I don't know what this is, but it sounds like it could.
Huh.
I don't think I can get anything just from this, though.
No.
Let's get an extra second, see if that does anything.
That was no help.
I love how when you add a second, sometimes it just feels like you're listening to the same clip again. I think we're gonna go straight to extra 2 there.
Yeah.
It's just more of the same.
Mm-hmm. Goodness, yeah, I'm still at a loss on this one. Okay, has some actual depth to it now.
I feel like
I still have no idea, but it sounds like a band I should know.
I almost made it sound less familiar. I mean, thing is, it sounds like a lot of 60s stuff, so unless we have a good guess, I already skipped, but like, generally, if you have like some sort of guess, we can always, so there's nothing, getting a wrong guess is just as good as skipping, so we might as well try, but, yeah, let's...
Is it just the band, or with a specific song?
We are looking for a specific song, but oftentimes, if you have an artist, they'll only have like 2 or 3 of their songs in the selection,
Gotcha.
So it's, once you have an artist, you might be able to just guess it. I mean, if you have an artist in mind, then we could also just look at what they have as options. Because that's still got nothing.
I'm gonna know it as soon as I see it if I don't guess it, because it does sound like a band that I should know. Like, it sounds like a psychedelic rock band of some kind, but I just can't think of the name of the band. So I guess just try the last snippet.
Well, I know what I'm going to type in there if we don't have any ideas.
All right, go for it. I'm pretty sure I know the name of the song now as well, but...
Well, I mean, it's probably Down in the Boondocks, and I guess that would then be by Billy Joe Royal, huh?
Yeah, never mind. I did not know that.
I mean, he keeps singing it. I don't know if that is what it is, but that was my best guess.
I'm assuming it is. I'll go with that.
Yep, that was correct. So yeah, that is... I'm not gonna unnecessarily play that right now, but yeah, that is, every now and again you have one of those where it's like, oh, they just sang the title, I think, and then just type it in and see if that is. Yeah, we hit to the road, Jack, thank you. For that reference, 70s, let's see what we can do. I think this was my best one, also. I've played this a couple times on myself, I think. Didn't look at the stats for the other one, but no, actually it wasn't. I think I had one that was a bit better, but yeah. I'm not good at this by any stretch, but let's see what we have.
I feel like it's rough, especially the first just 2 seconds.
Sometimes I feel like if you know the song, oftentimes I do get it on the first one, but it depends. Well, that doesn't tell me anything.
No. Sounds like some disco, though.
Disco? In the 70s?
Nah, not anymore. Not anymore. It sounded a little bit disco-ish at the first 2 seconds, but it's also, wrong era.
If you had to have me guess a genre, in the 70s, what will I possibly
I know, wrong era. But the intro, the first 2 seconds
it's
definitely sounds
right era, that's what I'm saying. Right? Like, 70s is like all disco. It's kind of like guessing electronic in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have ABBA, Bee Gees, like all the big sort of disco songs. Well, ABBA is a bit borderline, but let's get another 2 seconds though, right?
Yeah. I'll be honest, disco's not really something that I know a lot about. One of the genres that flew me by.
I mean, I know a couple of songs, but like this song certainly, I got nothing, man. That's listen to a longer snippet, I guess. Let's listen to the entire 17 seconds then.
Whatever gets you through the night.
Whatever gets you through the night?
I doubt that's the title. It didn't sound like that would be the title, but
probably
it's
not.
Worth looking up.
Probably not.
Whatever gets you through the night. John Lennon?
It's a John Lennon? No.
I mean, it's better than nothing.
No, it probably is, but like, John, what are you doing?
Whatever gets you through the night by John Lennon.
John, what are you doing?
Huh. That, I would not have thought that it was John Lennon, first of all.
No.
And then second of all, I've never heard of this song in my entire life. But, 2 for 2. We're rocking this, man. Yeah, we can have Night Fever. I like the music references that they put in there, like, when you get an answer.
Yeah.
Let's see what we got here. That was barely audible. Yeah, I got nothing, man. Let's...
Most sounds like Harry Potter. Yeah, what did that...
It sounds like a flute, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, like... I don't know what 80s you're talking about. Is it Kleine Zauberflöte by Mozart? I don't know. That was maybe the 80s, like the 1580s or whatever. I don't know from when he actually is, but
yeah, 1580s. We're just going different centuries now.
no one said it was the 1980s. I don't know. Let's listen to the slightly longer bit.
Okay.
At least I could hear that very well.
That definitely feels like an 80s song. Holy cow.
So, I can't get anything out of this so far.
No. The drums seem familiar, though, but again, those just sound like 80s drums.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've played the drums like that before, so like that's not necessarily particularly indicative of anything.
You know, that does actually sound like a song that I know. Again, I could be wrong, but I might actually know what this one is once we hear a little bit more.
Oh, so you don't know from this, or should I just play it again?
No, but it's starting to, like, the clip that we had started to, like, phase into something that does sound a bit familiar.
See, I thought the same thing that you thought, and then you started singing it, and I'm like, actually, never mind.
Yeah.
I'm like, this sounds familiar. Like, wait, who are you? What are you singing about? But hey, we got text. If push comes to shove, we can always just try typing in the text.
Something.
Want to listen to the full segment, or do you have any ideas?
Yeah, let's just skip ahead again.
I was gonna say, like, I can type in some of the stuff that he sang, but I could barely understand what you were saying because we're not really overing out his mouth all that much.
I'm gonna know who this is as soon as it says it. I know the voice. The voice actually does something. It almost sounds like what's his name?
I was thinking it almost sounds a bit like Billy Idol, but I don't know if that's true or not. Because also, like,
hold on,
I think the way he sings doesn't fit. Like, the voice, I think, sounded almost a bit like it, but I think he can usually open his mouth when he sings. Like, he can usually understand what he's saying.
Yeah. Why can't I think of his name? He's massively famous, and I can't think of his name all of a sudden. He had that one song, well, at least the one song with Mick Jagger. Hold on. Let me see if I can search it.
One song with Mick Jagger. Who had a song with Mick Jagger?
David Bowie. It almost sounds like David Bowie a little bit.
Let's see. Do we have?
That's who it was. I can't think of his name.
Bowie. I think he still was around at the time. We have Absolute Beginners. Under Pressure.
Dancing in the Street was the song that's with Mick Jagger. Yes. I'm saying if any of these three, it's obviously got to be Absolute Beginners. But otherwise,
I mean, if it was Under Pressure, I would have recognized it in 2 seconds, and then
yeah.
I think since it's 80s, I would have actually gotten it. But like, if it was 90s, I would have had to be like, wait, is this actually Under Pressure? Or is it Ice Ice Baby? Because But I guess let's submit this. New Moon on Monday by Duran Duran.
Yeah, I don't listen to Duran Duran, but it did sound a bit like David Bowie, so it was worth a shot.
I like some Bowie songs, but I hadn't particularly heard of Absolute Beginners, though I think that actually was one of the episodes of The Men Who Fell to Earth, all of which are named after Bowie songs, so I should have known that is a Bowie song, I guess, but I wouldn't have been able to know what it is. So we got the 90s, our chance to redeem ourselves.
Yes, with our actual generation of music.
Well, the thing is, I would have done better in theory, I should have done better in the 70s or 80s, so,
I'm a 90s baby.
Well, at least she was singing.
Shit. I know this song. Can I Google, based off of lyrics that I know are going to be later in the song? To look for the artist?
Okay, before you do that, tell me what you know, and maybe I actually know the song.
I know, if this is the song I'm thinking of, there's a line later on, it's like, you said, do what I want to do, or do what you want to do, or something like that. You said, and it sounds like that. I'm almost positive that's what this song is.
No, it doesn't.
I just don't know who this is.
I mean, honestly, since it's not something that we just heard, I guess you could maybe try Googling it just to see if we can vindicate ourselves, but Jesus Christ. I'm normally not this terrible, I swear.
I guess go a little bit further.
I had no choice.
No. I don't know if that's the same song, but it might be. Who is this?
No choice, but
This is such a 90s sounding song, too.
I mean, yeah, I guess.
Oh.
I had no choice but to hear you. You stayed.
I don't have anything, man. I don't.
No.
I'm starting to think I might not know the song, which, that kind of checks out today. I guess let's listen to 4 more seconds of it.
I had no choice but to hear you. You stated your case time and again.
I feel like I should know who this is. My hippie mother would be disappointed with me for this one.
The thing about the 90s is I don't usually go out of my way to listen to that much 90s music, and I'm just young enough to where I would have missed it, so... This is...
Yeah.
I like to listen to a lot of the older music, but 90s is really... I mean, it's not that I probably have songs from every decade since the 50s in my music, circulation, but, the core of it certainly is sort of the, 70s, 80s stuff,
yeah.
So 90s not necessarily.
For me, the 90s stuff that I love is nothing like this at all. It's more like grungy or rap or the rock stuff that came out of the 90s. So this is not something that I would have listened to outside of my mom. But I absolutely know I've heard this song before. I just don't know who this is.
I guess our last shot is then to just listen to the entire thing, huh?
Yeah.
I had no choice but to hear you. You stated your case time and again. I thought about it.
I have no idea.
No.
I
Head Over Feet by Alanis Morissette.
Okay, Alanis Morissette, yeah.
Isn't it ironic?
That makes sense.
Don't you think?
That song is not ironic at all. Isn't that the irony of it?
So, if you want to do another one, we can check out the official hurdle of the day.
Sure, let's go for it.
Because that can be just about anything. Let's see, hurdle.app. Because that can be anything, which means that you might have a better shot at this, but you might not. The first time I listened to this, it was a song, I was like, what the fuck even is this? I've never in my life heard this. And I was like, okay, this might not be that interesting, but I've played a couple since, and some of them were actually good. The last two, I think, were pretty good. So, yeah.
Okay.
Let's see. That was easy.
Yeah, okay. Another brick in the wall?
Yep.
Let's go.
Another brick in the wall, part 2. We don't need no education.
That was easy. As soon as I got to that scream, I'm like, alright.
We don't need no thought control.
Good song. I actually have a couple of the albums on record.
In the classroom. See, sometimes the official hurdles are actually kind of easy.
Yeah.
It's Jesus Christ. We were really struggling with ones that should have been in our wheelhouse. And then, So, that's what I was saying with the artist ones though, right? Where it's the more specific you get, the more obscure the individual songs are, generally speaking. Because you have to somehow fill up your entire list. And so, if you do the general hurdle, in theory, I think they're just like some of the most well-known songs in the world, except that it also includes songs that are well-known right now that I would have maybe heard once somewhere, because I just don't listen to the radio that much these days, and when I do, it's usually to the oldies station. So, yeah. I think that brings us very nicely, no, not really, into topic number 2, adaptations.
Cool.
I mean, I did mention The Man Who Fell to Earth, which is an adaptation / sequel of a movie, which is an adaptation of a book, so, there's that. Yep. A TV show based on a movie based on a book.
There you go.
So
got like 3 degrees of separation.
Well, 2, but yeah.
2, well, I'm bad at math. I switched majors for a reason.
You should do computer science. Off-the-one errors are very common.
Yeah.
So, what do you think needs to be paid attention to when you're adapting media? I guess the most obvious question to ask is what makes a good adaptation. I feel like we've talked about this before I have talked about this with someone else, but that doesn't matter. We are allowed to redo topics.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously sticking to the feel of the original to at least some extent, making it feel like it's at least somewhat related while still having its own identity. Because I feel like a lot of times either they stick too much to the source material without realizing that, like, for instance, with video games, some of the stuff that they try to do with movies, where they try to adapt it, that's not going to feel the same because a lot of the enjoyment comes from actually playing that yourself and experiencing it yourself. But watching it, you don't get that same feeling. Or just with
I mean, the Mario Brothers movie was a masterpiece.
Have you actually seen it?
I think I've seen most of it, interesting enough, because I once caught it while channel surfing. But I
forgot that actually was released.
Yeah, no, like I watched it on TV, like on actual cable television, like.
I don't know, like books to movies, books to TV shows, that kind of stuff. You have to kind of know your limitations. You can't get too detailed with it unless you're going to go the length. Like books to TV shows, you can get more detailed if you have the longevity to pull it off. Like Game of Thrones, books to TV shows. Obviously, they kind of ran out of source material by the end, but at the same time, especially the earlier seasons when they stuck strictly to the books and only deviated a little bit here and there, it was great. But with movies, you run the risk of not having the ability to kind of portray all you want to do from the book. Like I liked what they did with the first one, but I didn't love it coming from someone who read the book. I don't know about The Stand. I've heard very, very mixed things about the TV adaptation of The Stand. Just when you have that kind of length of a book, it's very hard to cut stuff out and still make it flow as seamlessly as it does in the book. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of examples I could go with, but I'll let you talk for a bit.
I've neither watched nor read Game of Thrones, so I'm not an expert on this, but from my understanding, it also involves a lot of political intrigue and that sort of stuff, which I feel like is almost impossible if you wanted to, for example, adopt it into a movie, right? Yeah. It sounds... Because if they would have done a Game of Thrones movie, I would assume, again, based on my very limited knowledge just from sort of cultural osmosis, that it would have had to cut down on a lot of the actual, like, stuff that people like about it. Not to mention that, I'm not sure how they would have done rating-wise, which is also movies oftentimes... I mean, we've recently started seeing more R-rated movies as they see that those can be successful. But if you cut everything out of if you cut a lot of the political stuff out of the books, I'm not sure how much of, the fight for the throne or whatever is still going to be in there. And I feel like it inevitably ends up being like, oh, yeah, we're just gonna, like, tell a fantasy story that has those characters in it, rather than actually all they're faithfully adapting the source material. So I think scope is something that's very important that you kind of brought up, where certain stories are very hard to do as movies, for example, if it's just too much there where you can't cut everything out because you kind of need to keep a story.
Yeah.
I think a good example of misadapting for scope also is The Hobbit. I think I've only seen the first
I thought about that too,
but The Hobbit is a very small book, and it doesn't make sense that they would adapt it into 3 movies when they adopted The Lord of the Rings, which was technically it was originally published as 3 books, I think. So that makes sense to make 3 movies. So I think if I remember the story correctly, Tolkien actually wanted to publish Lord of the Rings as 1 book, and his publisher was like, no, this is like way too long, and so they made it 3 books. So I think that actually is an interesting example in that way, but it's still 3 novels long, so making it 3 movies makes sense, while having like 1 novella into 3 movies is a bit of a stretch. You can always add or remove stuff, but you probably want to keep the core story the same in most cases, or at the very least, sort of keep the spirit of it. That's actually sometimes it's more important to keep the spirit of the story than to keep like the actual details of what happens. There are some great examples, if I could come up with any, of where they like almost shot for shot like redo scenes from what they're adapting, but then the story just falls flat, and it's like, okay, I would have rather you stayed faithful to like the overall thing, to the overall like idea of the story, rather than getting all of the individual scenes in there. I think to some degree that happens with Watchmen, because they changed the ending in the movie, or Zack Snyder changed the ending a little bit, and so that gives it a very different message, despite the fact that there are a lot of I've seen some side-by-side comparisons of like frames from the comics and scenes from the movies, and like it is very close visually oftentimes. But again, that's not necessarily the most important thing.
One example that sticks out to me for a video game to movie adaptation that completely misses the point and theme of the actual games is the Resident Evil series. And I get that later in the series it gets more action oriented, starting with 4, especially 5 and 6, that kind of thing. But good God, if it's just not a completely shoehorned action fest with almost no horror, when the original games are very focused on survival horror and suspense and that tension, and the movies are just like, fuck it, bunch of bullets, big ass action scenes, all this action, none of the horror, and it falls flat on its face. I mean, I can't say that I didn't watch a few of them and enjoy them for the mindless shitstorm that it was, but at the same time it's kind of like, alright, this is not a horror movie. This is an action movie with zombies.
Yeah, that's another one that I can't really speak to. I think I've seen 1 or 2 of those movies, like, maybe a decade ago, and I haven't played any of the games, so... I mean, horror isn't generally my genre, so for me, maybe that change would have actually been a good one, but also there's always the thing, there are 2 things you have to do with adaptation, right? You have to tell a good story, and you optimally also make a good adaptation. So... the thing is, you say the films are enjoyable to watch, but they don't really replicate the games, where it's like, that is fine for people that don't necessarily know the games, but to people that have played the games, that might not be as good. So it gets a bit more complicated there, where I remember like watching things that I thought weren't that bad, and then seeing that people were like, oh, this is like completely ruining what they're adapting, and I'm like, huh. Like, they told a decent story. It seemingly they just didn't tell the story that you wanted them to tell. I can't come up with a good example. I know I've heard some complaints about the Halo show not being very faithful, but I thought for the most part it was a decent story. I mean, it had some flaws for sure, but I think it was overall a competent enough story. Like, but it followed very stuff mostly followed logically, and it was enjoyable to watch. But again, I haven't played the game, so I can't really say how faithful it is. I've heard some complaints about Foundation not being very faithful. I honestly don't know how I feel about Foundation, because I liked the show, but also there's a lot happening there, and I'm still not 100% sure if I could even like recount all of the events in detail. And I did start reading the books, but I'm only like 3/4 of the way through the Foundation, which technically is still before the first Foundation book. I can already see a lot of the differences in the show, but also I haven't actually read the first Foundation book yet, so it's hard to say how different it truly is by the end of it, right? So,
gotcha.
If you're basically just reading the prequel to what they're adapting, then you can only tell so much that it's definitely different.
I had a point and I just lost it. It was about a book adaptation. Oh, Aragon. I didn't actually watch the movie, but from all accounts that I've heard, the movie adaptation of the book is abysmal. Like just a downright disgrace.
I want to say I've watched the movie once, but I don't remember anything about it. I have read at least the first 3 books. I think the author actually wrote a 4th one later.
He did.
But I think I only read the first 3. But that's also, I mean, Jesus Christ, I would have, that would have been like, middle school.
A while ago.
Well,
I read the first 3 as well, and there was such a gap in between them that I'm guessing it's the same reason for you that you never read the 4th, because there was such a gap in between the 3rd and the 4th book.
Yeah, I think after I read the 3rd one, I then heard that the 4th one was coming out or something. I don't even remember when it came out. Maybe.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember exactly, but so yeah, that was. I think I had initially gotten all 3 at once or something, but then I'd never gotten around to getting the 4th one or something. But again, it must have been kind of 6th, 7th grade when I read those, so I don't know, it was been 6 years of school after then, 6 years, again, I say, things happened a decade ago, and this is, at least a decade ago, probably more, so, we're talking about, 14, 15 years ago, sort of, well, maybe 15, no, not 15, well, yeah, but 13 years ago or something, and it's I don't remember that much about the books. And again, I feel like I must have seen the movie. Maybe I just saw a trailer for it. But if I've seen the movie, then it must have been so unremarkable that I don't remember anything. So make of that what you will. I do remember some bits and pieces of the books, but also not that much. I mean, I've always been I don't know, 11 or so at the time. So that's the other thing. The thing is, I stopped reading, you mentioned stopping reading when you got to college, right? I kind of stopped reading when I was I don't know, 12, 13, 14, somewhere around there. So,
yeah.
And then until 1 or 2 years ago. So, most of the stuff that I remember reading is I don't really remember that much of it, really. Also, I tried reading The Lord of the Rings, and I thought it was very dry, halfway through the 2nd book, and I just kind of couldn't get myself to finish it. But again, I was probably 12. So.
Yeah, I could see that being an issue.
So, it might just be a thing that I wasn't quite ready for yet. It's always kind of wild when I think back to, some of that stuff. I mean, it's a bit off topic, but actually, I know how to tie that back in. But whenever I think about, oh yeah, I read that book, it's always oh yeah, you must have been, I don't know, 12? And it's kind of I wouldn't have thought I was that young when I read it, right? That comes up often. Yeah. If you would have had me guess how old I was when I read it without me actually thinking about the timeline of things, I would have probably been I don't know, 14, 15, and it's oh no, 12. What I also read when I was probably around 12 or 13 or something, is The Hunger Games, which was also adapted into movies, and I certainly remember. I don't even remember if I saw all the movies, but I definitely saw the first one. That one I remember more so. I remember some stuff that, as I was watching the movie, being they cut this, they cut that, and at the time I wasn't very happy with it, but I think most of it isn't that terrible necessarily. But I feel the movie often, in a lot of ways, does just feel like a pared down version of the book. And I don't know if that's what you would necessarily aim for with an adaptation. I mean, you said it has to have an identity of its own, right? It kind of feels weird to just say it's oh yeah, it's just the book, but I cut out some stuff. I mean, it was very popular. I mean, it basically inspired a lot of the YA movies that came after it, but YA adaptations, and also I think the YA books were also partly by that and partly by Harry Potter inspired. Also, it followed that stupid trend where every single YA novel to movie adaptation split the last book into 2 parts. Every single one. Harry Potter did it. Hunger Games did it. Divergent, I think, did it, and those movies were already a bit of a mess. From what I hear, I haven't read the books. I couldn't tell. I'm not sure if I've seen all the movies. Twilight, sort of in that vein, I think also did it for the last book split.
It did, yes.
All of those series were oh shit, running out of books. Let's just, I don't know, turn the last book into 2 movies. And every single one did it. I mean, I don't know about Maze Runner. I think that's also based on books.
It is, but I never read them or watched them.
I think I've seen the first 2 movies. But yeah, it's hard to talk about adaptations where you haven't read the source material, so... I guess one thing that we can certainly bring up, or that I can bring up, is a bit of a weird case of adaptations, which is superhero comics. Because we talked about like keeping the spirit of the story and that sort of stuff, but superhero comics are usually adapted in as far as they tell stories with those characters, and there are like certain like cornerstone characteristics that we kind of assume the character has, and pretty much everything else is up for grabs. So sometimes they like take inspiration from comics, but even then they're often not very. As I said, like Logan is technically inspired by Old Man Logan, but that like old Logan in the future is just about the comparison where that ends. Like Weaker Healing Factory, yes, sure, but like most of the plot is completely novel.
Yeah. I mean, there was that one X-Men movie where they had Deadpool as a character, but apparently, like, I didn't know it at the time, but I could tell that it was kind of like just a mess, where they had him as this like weird amalgamation, and it wasn't like Deadpool at all. And then they made an actual Deadpool movie that was more fitting of the source material. I just remember at the time when I don't remember what movie it is, but everyone hated it.
That was X-Men Origins Wolverine, and I remember after having seen that movie, thinking that actually they had a pretty good Deadpool in that movie before he got his powers. And then, of course, was a character as portrayed by Ryan Reynolds, who would then later go on to, I think it was Ryan Reynolds also back then, who then would go on to portray him in a solo movie. I'm pretty sure that is true. Let's see, X-Men Origins Wolverine. That should be close enough. I think I mistyped some stuff, but let's go to IMDb. Why not? I think it was two actors that played Deadpool. I think a different actor played him after he got his powers for some reason. Scott Summers, Heather Hodgson, James, John Howard, Joe Victor, Thomas Levens. Where is Wade Wilson? Ryan Reynolds, yeah. So he played him, and I was like, yeah, he did a good job with it. Before they literally took away his mouth of a character that's nicknamed the Merc with the Mouth.
Yes.
Like, who thought that was a good idea?
They gave him his own movie.
No, but I mean, I guess what do we think in general about not just how faithful they are, but also the fact that, again, pretty much every Superman and Batman movie you've seen, and even most of the MCU movies, aren't really based on, like, a specific comic, right? They take the origins of the character, they take the power set of the character, usually, and they like, keep some of the framework of the character. They usually keep a costume that's somewhat reminiscent of the comics, but usually not quite exact, though a lot of the movie costumes do work very well. And some of the comic costumes do look goofy when you just too closely take them. But like, I don't know, what do you think about like just that sort of type of adaptation where you're really adapting characters more so than you're adapting stories?
I mean, I don't have any problem with it, honestly. I think that, especially when you're going from something like, Batman, Superman, you can only tell the same story so many times before people start to get up and, frustrated with the fact that, all right, you're just going verbatim from these comics, right? I feel like some of what they do with some of the like Batman movies, for instance, which is one of the few that I've always gone back to and kind of liked, especially like with when Christian Bale was Batman, or even like with the new Batman, where what's his name?
Robert Pattinson.
Yes. It was way too long, but I really liked what they did with him, where they made him kind of more angsty and way more violent of a Batman. It was a way grittier Batman than I feel like they've portrayed in recent years, and I really liked what they did with it, despite the fact that it was too long, and I feel like they shoehorned the romance in.
That is definitely a movie that I should also watch. Honestly, like, that is almost the most embarrassing thing to admit that I haven't seen, because I'm usually pretty good on keeping up with my superhero stuff, but that one I haven't seen yet. But yeah, the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, with those were interesting because they take, so that first of all they did a thing that most superhero movies did back then, where they just take kind of the character that it's about and their supporting cast and villains and kind of pretend like no other heroes exist, which in most cases they don't. But they also tonally had a lot of differences, I guess, from a lot of previous adaptations, and they did kind of try for this like dark and gritty sort of style, which I think worked for those, but you can't really do all of your superhero movies like that, so it becomes super complicated when you have a shared universe. Because Dark and Gritty does not work for Superman. Man of Steel is not a good movie. That's actually one that I've seen. Like, no. Also, that
I've never actually seen that one. But...
kind of sucked. Not gonna lie. You've probably seen the costume, speaking of,
Yes.
So Superman's costume traditionally has a feature that people have more recently been hesitant to put in movies, which I understand, which is that he was wearing the tights, like the red tights over his, the rest of the costume. And I get that probably looks goofy in live action, but the Man of Steel costume just had no separation, and it's just a mass of blue, and it's also way too dark. I think the Superman costume from Supergirl and Superman and Lois, I think it's a similar costume, if not the same one, but just with more fake muscles to fill it out. That one does a very good job because it gives them a belt, right? That's the obvious solution, right? Just a red belt. It breaks up the colors. It doesn't look goofy. It's a very simple fix, but yeah. I do generally think, coming back to answer my own question from earlier, that it's fine to adapt the characters rather than the stories. I also do like when they do bring in elements of comic stories, though. The MCU does a good job of sometimes doing that. Like, not every MCU movie is based on a comic directly, but some of them certainly are. Like, Civil War is straight up based on a comic event of the same name. The Inciting Incident was changed quite a bit, in part because they took things that already had set up. Well, actually, they didn't really. No, okay, no. It's based on things that happened in Age of Ultron, so that they had already set up a lot of the stuff that the Sokovia Accords, I think was in the movie, were based on, whereas the Superhuman Registration Act in the comics was based on an event involving the New Mutants. I think it was the New Mutants, which they couldn't have used anyways because Fox had the rights at the time, and that was before the merger. By the way, monopolies are bad. Who would have thought? Jesus Christ, Disney. I mean, Disney is a complicated thing about monopolies because I kind of like that they have all of their characters back together, like for Marvel at least. But it's like, oh yeah, no, getting the Fox characters back is good. But also, like, the merger itself is kind of bad. So, there are like 3 movie studios at this point. Well, 4, I think. But, I mean, it's like, dude, you have Disney, you have Paramount, you have Sony, and you have AT&T, which owns Warner.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, who else do you have, right? Like, Lucasfilms is Disney, Marvel Studios is Disney, Pixar is Disney. It's like, Fox is Disney. Well,
Disney's just going to control everything. ESPN is owned by Disney now.
Yeah.
I think Hulu may be owned by Disney.
I'm not even sure. But, like, HBO is owned by Warner, which is in turn again owned by AT&T, right? I think Legendary is also owned either by Warner or by AT&T, which, same difference. So, like, yeah, no. That's not the topic, but yeah, no. So yeah, before Marvel had all the X characters, they couldn't really do the Inciting Incident as they did in the comics, especially because it wasn't initially about mutants specifically before it became about superhumans in general. So it does make sense that they couldn't do that, but they did Civil War in arguably a somewhat reasonable fashion. It's kind of weird that because Infinity War happened shortly after, it almost seems like after Civil War, like the movie happened, everyone kind of just forgets about it. And of course, they did the Infinity Gauntlet storyline, basically, kind of, sort of, not really, but they took elements from it. They did, of course, origin stories are usually pretty close to the comic movies, to the comics in the movies. And they did some other stuff in the MCU that was based on comic stories, but then other ones are not necessarily. I mean, for example, I think Thor 3, right, where they, I mean, yeah, it's kind of inspired by World War Hulk, but like that's more in the inspired by it camp and not necessarily in the adapted from. I'm trying to think. I don't know that much about the later Iron Man movies as in like what they would be based on, but just because I don't know that doesn't mean that they aren't based on anything in particular. I think Guardians of the Galaxy is relatively original. I mean, the team existed, but even those have been slightly altered for the movies. Not that you would be able to tell if you read comics that have been published since the movies. That's another thing. It's almost an adaptation issue, but comics sometimes have this weird tendency to follow the movies. Like, if the movies make a change to the character, the comics will oftentimes follow suit and also make that change. Which I have very mixed feelings about. In some cases, it just is actual improvements, right? Because, again, there's usually a reason why the movies do that sort of stuff, but sometimes it's just like the movie makes an arbitrary change and all of a sudden it also shows up in the comics and it's like, why are you doing this? I think the most interesting example of this is Yondu. So, I don't know, have you seen Guardians of the Galaxy?
I've seen the first two, yes.
Well, there's only been two so far, so...
okay. I don't watch that many superhero movies, so I wasn't sure if they made a third one.
So, there is a character called Yondu in those movies, who is the guy who basically adopted Peter Quill, right? Star-Lord. And...
Yeah.
That character now also exists in the comics, but he's inspired by and named after a character from the original Guardians of the Galaxy, which is a story set in the future, in the year 3000. And the character of Yondu there is very different. But now in the comics, there's also a character called Yondu in the main continuity that is a lot like the movie version. So they just basically made the character as a nod to the comics without directly adapting him out of the comics, but then the movie character was directly adapted into the comics as well.
Why not?
So, I don't know if that's necessarily a bad change. Also, the jacket that he wears in the movies, he basically started wearing in the comics. Like, Peter Quill, that is. Like, pretty much as soon as the movies came out. Like, his character design usually was different, and then the jacket design, which I do like the new design, but still, it's like, all of a sudden it was everywhere in the comics.
Yeah.
It's like...
Sorry.
I'm thinking that's not a coincidence. Anyways, anything else about adaptations?
I think I'm good on
okay.
On that.
In that case, do you want to move on to our last segment, the songs of the week?
Sure.
What is your song of the week?
So, my song of the week is I've actually had this band on before when I've done this podcast. A band called Beach House. I figured it was fitting because I'm actually seeing them in about 3 weeks now. They're a band that when I wanted to see them live, COVID started happening, and I was like, okay, as soon as concerts start happening again, they're going to be the first band that I see live as soon as they start going on tour again. And the day that I found out that they were going on tour, I wound up buying tickets for them. So this is off of their most recent album called Once Twice Melody, and it's a song called Masquerade.
It sounds nice enough. This is one of those songs that I have to like listen to in full, probably more than once, to like fully grasp. And I mean, I did just like quickly clip out a segment before the show, so I haven't listened to it in full yet. But this one that
the problem with them is that you kind of have to listen to them. The songs all kind of start developing on themselves as the songs go on. They start adding different instrumentals, different sounds through the song. And it's not a song that's like chorus centric. It's more about building kind of like that sound throughout the song or the album.
Which I do appreciate on principle, because I feel like a lot of songs do start to follow the structure oftentimes a little too strictly, where it's like it feels like a lot of songs end up doing the same thing in a lot of ways, and having some more variety is definitely a good thing. I sometimes when I look up songs. For songs of the week, when I look up songs, either my own sometimes guest songs on Genius Lyrics, to just look at where like obvious points are to like grab stuff from. And it's like verse 1, like bridge, verse 2, and then there's like no chorus, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And in some cases, I think I've had one song, I don't remember which one it was though, where it just put the text. It like didn't even bother trying to be like, this is a verse, this is a bridge. It's like, no, that's a song. Just make of it what you will. And it's like, yeah, fair enough. Right? Like,
why not?
Maybe the structures don't always perfectly work to describe everything. Anything else you want to say about that?
Not really. I mean, the album itself is that and another song off the album called Pink Funeral. It's actually a really long album that they released in 4-part segments over the course of 4 months. Each part is 4 songs. The album itself is, I believe, like an hour and 10 minutes, maybe even an hour and 20 minutes. Those 2 songs, though, this and Pink Funeral, are 2 that are very gothic sounding, very kind of, I don't want to say synth wavy because that's kind of a lot of their music tends to have a lot of synth wavy element to it. But it's almost eerie, almost kind of like gothic sounding. And then the rest of the album tends to follow a bit more of a lavish orchestral kind of like nicer sound to it. So it's definitely a nice juxtaposition when you compare it to the rest of the songs on the album.
My song of the week is not nearly as deep, but I picked a song by a band that I like, a song that I like as well, of course, and that is Baba O'Reilly by The Who.
Good song. Yeah.
So it's not that I'm like the biggest The Who fan or anything, but they have a couple good songs, and when I was looking for songs to use as song of the week this week, I initially saw another The Who song, and I was like, you know what? I was looking at my folder with all of the Who songs that I have, and I was like, you know what? Baba O'Reilly is like the one I'm feeling the most right now. So that's
classic anyway.
Yeah.
I didn't like him too much when I was younger, but I got a lot of respect for them as I started listening to more and more different, like, varied genres of music.
This is the kind of stuff that I would have been able to guess in the Hurdle earlier.
Yeah, right.
Since you are aware of them, I will quickly mention the song that I initially looked at as song of the week that was eyeing, that I think I had used before though at one point, I'm not 100% sure, was Pinball Wizard, also by The Who.
Yep. Very familiar with that album.
I mean, yeah, that so that is everything I think about my song of the week, which also means that this episode of the Trash Talk Podcast is coming to a close. If you have anything else to add, leave us a comment. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. If you didn't, I guess give it a dislike. Not that anyone will be able to see it except for me. So I guess if you want to make me feel bad, give it I don't know. I don't care. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more like this. Link to the Discord server in the description below if you want to talk to us directly. Pimpkarp's also in there. And Pimpkarp?
That's it, JJ.
That's it.